Now let's think about the role of paving in stormwater management and infiltration. And paving is a huge issue. In residential neighborhoods, paving for cars takes up over 50% of the surface area, and it's impervious. And in commercial areas like downtowns and shopping centers, cars and their impervious surfaces take up 80% of the land. So what can we do about that? What we can do about that is replace that impervious pavement, that solid surface pavement, with porous paving or permeable paving. And what that means is that water can run through the paving and go down to the ground below and infiltrate. So porous paving is actually a reservoir of rocks with some kind of porous surface over the top. That's the way it works. Some years ago, in an earlier generation of staff at the college, some staff they were interested in sustainability, and they were looking at a parking lot, and they said, we would like to do the right thing. We would like to put in a porous parking lot. So what should we do? And sadly, I had to tell them that it was going to be expensive. And what I did was I put gravel in a bowl. So I got a bowl, put a bunch of rocks in it, and I put a piece of hardware cloth, wire screen, over the top of it. And then we sat down and talked, and I showed them how the bowl was like the reservoir in the parking lot, and that it's this deep reservoir of rocks that actually does the work, and that paving, whatever it is, bricks or whatever you've got over the top, that's the surface that lets the water through, but you have to have that bowl of rocks underneath, at least 18 inches deep. And so for them, they had an existing parking lot. They were going to have to do a lot of excavation, and they did a quick estimate, and yeah, it was expensive. So I'd like you to think about that what we are providing is a big reservoir of rocks for the water to run into, and then we put some kind of porous layer over the top to cover it that the cars can drive on. And this reservoir of rocks does two things. First of all those rocks provide surfaces for bacteria to live on. And those bacteria, the ones who take up residence are the ones who really like to eat petroleum. And so as stuff drips off the cars, those bacteria in the reservoir start eating that petroleum and breaking it down. And they break down a few other kinds too. And then, as the water drifts down through this bed of rocks, it gets down to the soil on the bottom and can infiltrate and recharge the groundwater. There's a whole series of layers, starting at the bottom with the plain soil and coming on up to the reservoir, a thin layer at the top, and then your porous paving, whatever it's made of. Here is just a nice example of a vast porous paving parking lot, well, 19 acres, at the Ford Rouge River truck plant. And according to the designer, it stores 3.6 million gallons of stormwater runoff. That subgrade is the soil, the dirt, at the bottom of your reservoir. And that is often undisturbed soil. You don't have to go in fact, you don't want to compact it. This bullet point up here says it could be compacted fill. That is, if you have really had to dig something out, you may have to bring in fill and compact that. But the best thing to do is just leave undisturbed subgrade, just excavate it out, make a deep hole, and that's where the water goes down. And it has to be stable, has to be relatively level, but it will be at whatever angle your paving surface is at. Now, some people will say, oh, we can't put a porous paving here because our soil is not permeable enough. We can only use sandy loam or whatever it is. But I call your attention to this recognized expert on stormwater, Bruce Ferguson. There are two prominent experts on stormwater that, at least that I turn to in the U.S., and one of them is all the people in Portland, Oregon, especially people at the Bureau of Environmental Services, and Tom Lipton, and Bruce Ferguson, who's a professor at University of Georgia, and he's done a ton of research actually gathering data on how this stuff works. And what he says is our goal is not to change to some other kind of soil. Our goal is to restore the hydrologic cycle and whatever it was, what the condition was that was there before we paved over it. So we're not limited to sandy soil. We're not limited by poorly drained soil. We're going to use what is on site. That was the subgrade. In the reservoir, that thick layer of rocks that stores the water, this thick layer of rocks has to be open graded, they say. And open graded means it's all one size of rock. At the bottom of this slide, I have pictures from, this is actually out of a discussion of geology, but never mind that. It illustrates the point. If you have rocks that are all the same size as on the left, you get, let's say, 30% of the space is pore space. It's open holes, and water can go in. On the right, let's say you have a bunch of different sizes of rock. So you have big rocks, medium rocks, little rocks. All those pore spaces get filled in, and there's not as much room for water. So that's why we want open graded rock. And just point of interest, where do you get open graded rock? Sand and gravel pits. We have some in Eugene, of course, and outside of Eugene. Sand and gravel pits use these vibrating screens, so there will be 2 or 3 decks with wire cloth on them, and they vibrate back and forth, and so they dump the rock onto the screen. Whatever is bigger than the opening in the screen bounces off the top and gets carried away. Whatever is smaller than the opening in the screen falls through, and it goes down to the next deck down, where the same thing happens, but you probably have a different size of wire cloth. And so as it goes through these various layers and gets carried away and resorted, you can wind up with the same size rock. Then the paving, the part that you see, is the covering that lets the water through. So it sits up above this reservoir. And you can use these unit pavers. A magazine I subscribe to that I always like to read is called Interlocking Concrete Paver magazine. Believe it or not, that's a thing. This picture is out of that magazine. So you can see, you can buy these pavers that are shaped so that there are holes in between, and you can put pea gravel or sand underneath and the water runs through. You do need to have some kind of edging so that the pavers won't gradually walk off the parking area. An inexpensive way to have a permeable surface is with gravel or something like that, decomposed granite, pea gravel. You might find that in places like pedestrian walking places. You can use it in parking lots. It's a little bit squirrely, you know, it rolls around. And you do have to have some kind of edging. It's kind of a pain to maintain because these rocks roll all over the place and they escape and so forth. Also, if this is for a place where you'll have pedestrians, this is not an accessible surface. try rolling a wheelchair on this stuff and you won't like it. And then you may have heard of these kinds of things, turf pavers, and they come in all different styles. The two basic ideas are some kind of plastic grid, plastic cell, or some kind of concrete cell. And the idea is you put that down on the layer underneath, and it is strong enough to hold up cars and trucks and even big emergency vehicles. And then you plant, usually they plant grass in the spaces in between, and it grows up through the concrete cells or through the plastic cells, and from a distance it looks like regular old lawn, and then maintenance crews can come in and mow it. You see this kind of thing often in overflow parking lots at sports arenas. And you can also see it in places where you want to maintain something that kind of looks like a landscape, but you want emergency vehicles to be able to drive over it. Porous concrete is regular concrete, except that the aggregate, the rocks, are open graded. So it's just like it's a regular concrete mix, water and cement and aggregate, but all the aggregate is one size. Same thing is true of porous asphalt. It's open graded aggregate, all one size. And in case you didn't know, the state of Oregon and some other states requires porous asphalt on the surfaces of all its state highways. So think for a moment about why they do that. I'll let you think for a moment. It's not to manage stormwater, although that's a nice side benefit. They're trying to prevent water from ponding on the surface of the road and causing vehicles to hydroplane. That's their thing. Here's the EcoTrust building again, this parking lot I love. This whole thing is porous asphalt. The sustainability director at the city told me that in hindsight, he wishes they had not put porous asphalt in the aisle in the middle. He wishes they had put porous asphalt in the stalls, which they did, and then something else in the middle, because this parking lot gets so much in and out traffic, people backing up, cranking their wheels, and as the wheels crank, they turn and they scrape on the asphalt, and they kind of pit the asphalt. Here are some more views of that parking lot, in case you haven't seen enough pictures of this. If you've ever been to OMSI in Portland, you have noticed these strips of plants in the middle of their parking lots. OMSI was the first major stormwater facility in Portland. It was built, this parking lot was built in 1990. And here is a pen and ink drawing by Robert Marassi, who designed those swales, the late Robert Marassi. So this was the city's first attempt at bioswales. They did some calculations and figured that they actually saved $78,000 in 1990 dollars by avoiding stormwater pipes. Across the road from OMSI is a satellite campus of Portland Community College, and they have what's called a parking grove, where you have parking stalls interspersed with trees. Then just a couple more slides of examples of swales. I think you've seen this one before. This is down in the city of Ashland. So different climate than we have here, more of a Mediterranean climate. The city of Ashland uses a different kind of plant mix in their swales. Here is the South Waterfront District in Portland. This is that tall OHSU building next to the overhead tram that goes over the freeway. And this is their parking lot. Look at that. So they have trees planted on the edges of their swales, and then their swales have various kinds of plants in them, and they have really made a big effort to disconnect the impervious surface. It's a wonderful example.